So this is the official start of our talk. Good afternoon and welcome to our talk, Knowledge and Research, Myths, Legends and Narration. What kind of knowledge does artistic research create? Sylvie Ringer in conversation with Belinda Grace Gardner, moderated by myself, Katharina Schlüter. I'd like to shortly introduce the speakers. And Dr. Belinda Grace Gardner, art theorist, critic, independent curator, born in North Carolina in the US, lives and works in Hamburg. And Sylvie Ringer, artist, born in Canada, also lives and works in Hamburg. The talk takes place in the context of the current exhibition, Peer to Piece, Vom Forschenden Blick, in the Galerie in Marstall, Ahrensburg. Sylvie Ringer talks to Belinda Grace Gardner about her installation, Singing Lands. To get an impression of the exhibition and Sylvie Ringer's work there, I will now show a short film. Afterwards, Belinda and Sylvie will start the talk and I will show some images from time to time of the works that we have in the exhibition. Enjoy the talk and now I will show the film.
Okay, so here we go. Sylvie, the image is of your outdoor studio in Canada, where you realized your latest project, which is now at in Ahrensburg, which we just saw parts of, details of. But before we start talking about your work, you know, the work you are now presently showing, I'd like to ask you a little bit, you know, about your approach to art making, which I guess one might, you know, call a kind of artistic research or aesthetic research project, which is ongoing and which, though still, even if you know, go to various places or have gone, you know, to various places to do your research, or also have different thematic, you know, strands there, you do also have certain elements in your work that I think run through the entire project as a whole. Can you maybe explain what these are, or your starting point basically as an artist, as a researcher and artist?
Yes, sure. I'm very much interested in landscape and using natural elements as metaphors for stories or atmospheres I want to talk about or work through in my drawings. And yeah, I'm very I noticed quite early that I'm very interested in what I can find in my immediate surrounding. Like, I feel like I'm very heavily influenced by the place where I am and where I work. So the light, the atmosphere, the smells, like all of these impressions will somehow find themselves in my work. So it makes a difference where I am to create work. And in the last years, I've started traveling to specific places that had an interesting story, or, you know, that had something that was interesting for me. And I'm very much interested in themes like the subconscious and like gardens, the idea of paradise. Also themes like, there's this saying, I think Belinda, you used it once too, it's like entre champs et loups, so between day and night. I'm interested in these twilight situations. And to talk about these things, I go to specific places.
You just mentioned it, that you are interested in like paradise scenarios, which in themselves are already more or less states of exception, if you like, or zones of exception. You know, meaning they're kind of outside of normal everyday life, or they're maybe inscribed into a normal everyday life setting, but they're definitely paradise situation is also something, is a kind of utopia. And I think this is also something you're finding, like these utopian pockets in the, in maybe some kind of landscape that is, where it's kind of inscribed, but you have to find it. Does it also have something to do with like uncovering these narratives or stories that might be hidden, in a place or in a landscape?
Yeah, I'm very curious about places, and especially in this idea of, the creation of like a perfect utopian situation, which never seems to work. Like it always seems to break at some point, or there's always like a moment where the whole thing falls apart again. And I'm particularly interested in this moment of like what makes things fall apart, or how, yeah, what makes a place special too? Like what makes a place dreamy, or yeah, this specific place was it was called the center of the universe. And I don't know, should I go into that story now of how I find that place?
Yeah, maybe just before you actually go into this concrete story, which is, I think, a really interesting story, I wanted to quote you that, in general, that you're interested in this maybe paradox even between oral traditions. That is maybe some kind of storyline that is not 100%, cast in stone or so, but rather, it fluctuates, it can change, it can shift. And on the other hand, the methods of scientific research, which would seem to exclude one another, but in your case, you use this, I think, paradox to your advantage, to aesthetic advantage, where you actually work with these, these tensions, or also, fissures actually in, between scientific objectivity and maybe the subjective narrative that underlies, the research. And yes, now I would really find it totally interesting to hear how, what is going on in this particular area which you explored and researched, and which I think was a Buddhist Lama claimed to be the center of the universe for some obscure reason, which you will explain maybe.
Yes. So the image that is shown right now is an image of the Dead Man Valley Road. This is the valley that I drove, that you have to drive into to find the place called Vidette Lake Nature Retreat. And Katharina,
Sylvie, this is in Canada, right? In British Columbia?
Yes.
And it's actually where you come from. So it's actually your home place, but in maybe an unfamiliar place within your home country situation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I was researching about my place of birth, Kamloops, which is like 6 hours from Vancouver in British Columbia, Canada. And I was curious because that landscape has a very, it's very desert-like, so it's not very typical for the rest of Canada. And I was interested in it, so I just started reading. I started reading articles on the internet. I started reading books. I started talking to people, and I found an article about. Yeah, I just came across an article that spoke about this place called Vidette Lake, and the story was that in the 80s, a Buddhist monk claimed it to be the center of the universe. And then, of course, I was super interested because I thought, great, I was born at the center of the universe. This is fantastic. And then I continued my research, and I wanted to find out, okay, why would people say this about a place on Earth? And then I realized that there was many different cultures that for different reasons found this specific place interesting. So then I read a different article where they talked about ley lines, which is, I think, the original idea is like energy lines that go around the earth, and everywhere where they cross is where people would build churches, which I think they did in Greece and also in Great Britain.
Mm-hmm.
so there was like the Buddhist connection, and then also a European interest in it, and then also right in that spot where that the Buddhists had claimed to be the center of the universe, there's like remains of an old medicine wheel of the indigenous people of those lands. So of course, I thought, okay, this is interesting. Like, what is coming to get like in this one place?
Mm-hmm. Or intersecting, actually, yeah. So it's a mixture of various cultural, influences or narratives also, and at the same time, it's also a magical place that remains enshrouded in a lot of mystery. But it's also, I think, if I correctly understood you, it was the site of a gold mine or gold rush even, or maybe mining activity, but that never actually managed to find the actual gold or the treasure, so to speak. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those were things that I read about that, and then I contacted the owners, because this is all privately owned at this time. Mm-hmm. And it's a resort, and it's owned by a lovely couple that doesn't want to advertise too much, which I'm doing right now, because they don't want to have the masses come to the center of the universe.
Exactly.
But yeah, there's actually still old structures on that property from the old times of the gold mine, which
I think we have an image even of that, don't we? I think.
Yeah, there's in the mountain, there's like holes. Maybe Katharina can show the image of that.
Yeah, Katharina, can we see the landscape? So those are, I guess, remnants of this former gold mining activity, right?
Exactly. So this is on the property. If you walk down the mountain, you get to the lake, which is actually a fault line, another interesting geographic thing. But yeah, I explored this area, and I found 3 of these basically holes in the earth. And it's really interesting because you go in there and you just look into this dark hole that points into this mountain. And, as far as I've understood, like the magic is somewhat in the mountain. Like something's coming out of this mountain that's causing all these things to happen. So what I like is that this is like I get to go back in history. I get to like research and see, okay, this is the story of this place. These are the actual things that happened. Mm-hmm. But then, just this idea of like holes in the earth leading to mystery, or like leading to some kind of healing fountain of something, that again is an idea that then translates into my work.
Here we already see this kind of fence-like structure that appears to be, kind of connected to this mining fence structure that we saw there. At least it's kind of, recalls that or evokes that. And we also see various details, I guess, of what you encountered there, or the associations, rather, with that which you encountered there. I think maybe this is also probably important to stress, that you are not, or on the one hand, you're very exact and precise with researching these aspects, details, backstories of this particular landscape. And on the other hand, though, the way you transform this into your artwork is much more abstract in a way. So you're already, when you're translating the reality of what you see, it is also already a kind of a an act of abstracting, extracting and abstracting what the reality is presenting to you. And again, it's like, I think, a kind of translation into a a narrative of its own. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I start with like a research idea where I actually read and gather facts, but unlike a scientist, I'm not bound to these facts. So I use what I want, or what serves me, or what is inspiring for me. And I think for painters or drawers, it's always like the interesting question is always, where do the images come from? And for me, it's really a combination of my reaction to things I read or see. And then the interesting part for me as an artist is, okay, if I know like this land, like one of the, like, people also call it singing lands, because the Buddhist monks said they would hear choirs in the air, which was one of the reasons why they determined this to be the center of the universe. And so just this idea of a land singing, what can that look like? Mm-hmm. That then sets off the creative process for me, where I try to like find symbols or ways of expressing that.
Mm-hmm. Of actually visually expressing something that is an acoustic phenomenon, basically. Yeah. So it always has something to do as well, I think, with making something visible that is in fact invisible, or that you can't quite grasp. I mean, also the whole idea of this magical, atmosphere and so on. This is also something that is, of course, not something you can, it's intangible. And if you turn this into something that is in fact visual and even spatial, which is what you're doing with your installations, because they are not only the flat picture plane, but also the space that you are creating with these pictures or images, and the sculptural elements. So you're kind of turning something intangible into something tangible and making it into a kind of a corporeal phenomenon or experience also for the viewer who is then confronted with these images. As you were mentioning, these dark holes or black holes, which of course also evokes the black hole of holes of the universe, like which are also quite mysterious still, even though I think a photo has been taken in the meantime, but still they remain enshrouded in mystery still. Can you say, or can you describe a little bit what this picture is representing? Because it seems to me like it's a mixture of various elements that you just described of seeing in the landscape that you researched.
Yeah. So one of the things I heard when I was on site at Vidette was that apparently there's 3 tectonic plates that meet right at that place, and the lake that kind of goes around the mountain is actually a fault line. Mm-hmm. So I found that idea really interesting. So there's this body of water, and like, what is it that's coming out of it? And you have like 2 bodies of earth, of rock that kind of meet. Mm-hmm. And yeah, what does that look like? How do they play with each other, or what comes out of it?
Right.
In this image, you can also see I like to work with different layers. So there's like, I first start with a layer of like it's aquarelle, and then I go on top of it with pastels or with charcoal. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I was thinking a lot about this idea of breaking open of something. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That was like the first image that came to mind when I think of. So people describe the center, they describe it as a portal. Like they say the reason why it's healing is because somehow earth energy is coming out of this mountain. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's a great image.
Right. Yeah, that is quite amazing. Even it's quite beautiful actually as an idea. Also, I think you're connecting something that has to do with the with terra firma and the universe, because this is called Moon Station. Can you say something about this here?
Yeah, I think for this work, so I've always been interested in the subconscious, and I've kind of I always use black that kind of represents for me the dreamlike or the subconscious, basically because that is how I perceive it. It's like if I go within to find knowledge or what I'm made of, I always visualize it as kind of fishing in the dark. And it's not necessarily something I can see, it's more something I can feel. Yeah. So in this image, I was also thinking of what, what does it feel like to be in a place of healing or a place of transition or change? Like what, I mean, it's I called it Mondstation because it's, that for me includes the idea that you're kind of alone. You're looking for things, like there's this flag, there's things happening in the air, but there's also this dark entryway into something, into the unknown, maybe, or something that we don't really know. Like I see this image a bit as it's like if you imagine yourself on a journey, this is like a step in between the journey. Like this is a moment where like, okay, I'm on this journey and this is where I am right now. Maybe I feel alienated. And I mean, this is just one, like, these are just my thoughts. Of course, every viewer has their own subjective.
Of course, yeah.
Story. Yeah.
And of course, it also has this kind of, I don't know, to me, it looks a little bit like some kind of mossy undergrowth, where you would be maybe, in some wooded area where something kind of pops out at you, and maybe there's some kind of, hidden life, among the undergrowth or something. This, something that I associated with. This again has this notion, or this notion of something cracking open or making itself, it reveals itself, but then it doesn't, so it remains, it both reveals itself, but then withdraws to a certain degree, which I think is also something that I have found in your works quite often, that, it has both something, feeling something and taking something out of sight, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Here we see a hand being raised in the dark.
Yeah, for this image, I was thinking a lot about, we have at the center of the universe, there's this mountain, and the mountain is full of knowledge. And for me, that's this, it's a similar metaphor to think, I mean, you can think of mountains as, these storages of knowledge, whatever kind of knowledge that may be. And in different cultures, they say that ancestors live in rocks or in mountains or some kind of spirits or ghosts. So the name Susan is actually my grandmother's name, who lived in that area. And yeah, I was thinking of my own ancestry and thinking of, I think the hand for me symbolizes, again, you have the black, like the subconscious, and the hand for me is, on the one hand, it could be like an old, like a charcoal drawing on a wall, and the symbol of a hand for me means trying to like touch something, like this attempt at trying to like understand who one is, what something is.
Right.
Yeah.
And it also actually recalls when when you think of these very early cave drawings, and some of these actually depict hands that seem to be waving from afar. And I always like this notion that, way back in the history of mankind, you have like this hand or these hands waving, into the present, so to speak. And it's almost like greeting, early mankind greeting later generations of mankind, and I think this is something that also struck me, that this might, there might be a connection to that as well.
Yeah, I actually did an installation before this work, during the Corona time in the window of my studio, and I had like little cards with different hands on them coming out of the charcoal, and I used that was the exact idea.
You have actually, you mentioned this notion of knowledge inscribed or embedded more or less in the idea of the mountain, or in the figure of the mountain. Does this connect to what you were just mentioning? This idea of
it does,
inherent knowledge. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, again, for this drawing, I was actually looking at hoodoos, also from that Kamloops area, and I was looking at the ways of like over time how these rocks had formed, and I took some of these parts, and then I wanted to do a mountain at first, and then this happened, and it's again, there's something coming out of it, or there's like a glow, or there's a, yeah, to me that's knowledge. I don't even know what kind of knowledge it is.
Yeah, maybe some kind of secret knowledge, or the knowledge of, I don't know, organic knowledge that is, you know, in the trees or in the wind or in, you know, in natural forms, which I think is also important to your work. From what I see is this idea of this organic natural world that exists maybe in a very independent way, you know, as a parallel maybe to our human world, or I mean, they are, of course, they're interlinked, obviously, but I think there's this idea I always sense in your work that as if you are, you know, also talking about or visualizing this, you know, the secret life of plants, or the secret life of, you know, other aspects of nature or of the natural world, which, you know, has its own narratives, so to speak, that are maybe beyond what we as human beings actually can articulate.
Yeah. Yes, and at the same time, we're all connected
With the natural world or with the organic world, yeah.
us. Like, that's also an interesting idea of separation, right? That we've created, that we think that we're somehow different from it.
It seems to me that there you have this, you know, you have both the man-made form in a way, but in this man-made form, there's some, or this, you know, this thing with this interface between, you know, nature and culture, or between the natural and the cultural or cultivated aspects of existence, and between art and life, maybe, I don't know. I mean, there seems to be something happening there in the vessel, where I'm not sure what is happening there, but maybe some monsters entity, I have no idea, or at least something seems to be growing
Yeah.
in it, and it's hard to really tell exactly where it's gonna, you know, go.
Yeah, it's funny. I never see it as something scary. Like, I think there's like a wilderness in us that we it's just there, and we can either tap into it or we don't. But I think there's a lot in us that there's like a universe and a wilderness in us. And I think of us as, I often think as our human bodies as vessels for our souls here on earth. And like, if you, like, during the period that you go through your life, there's all these things that happen to you, and you know, you get cracks, you break, or you change your color, or yeah, that's kind of an idea that I have with these, with the metaphor as being vessels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think you also mentioned that for you, or to you, fire it has, you know, this power of transformation, or it's a metaphor actually of this transformative power. Maybe we can have a look quickly at the quartz from Vidette Lake. This is a material that you actually found on site in this place.
Exactly. It's a quartz that I found right beside one of those old gold mine holes in the mountain.
Right.
And yeah, it's interesting when I thought of this exhibit. So when, you know, I went to this place and I set up my studio, and I would collect things, and then I would, you know, draw them, or I would take like certain patterns off a rock that I found. And for this show, I wanted to somehow bring it all in. Like, I wanted to kind of show, like, I wanted it to be very atmospheric, and like, I was trying to transport the idea of how I was working there and how these things are connected to each other. Mm-hmm. Obviously, this is a rock that I found. It's not a drawing, but still it kind of informed like sections that you can see in the work. Mm-hmm. And it's yeah, there was like this play between my works and the things that I found. So this was something that I wanted to put together.
Yeah. Well, I think this works very, very well because it does give you, again, it gives you this, tangibility or this palpability of place, and kind of magically turning the magic into something you can actually see and maybe touch even, or that has some kind of form and shape and three-dimensionality. Maybe we can just briefly talk about this larger piece in the background, which, this orange piece that seems to also consist of all kinds of layers. It looks almost like some kind of textile layer, or where you have the folds of some kind of garment or so, but at the same time it also evokes I guess those rock formations that you have there in this area.
Yeah, it was that drawing was also based on one of these holes in the mountain that I talked about.
Yeah.
I found them fascinating, and depending on what time of the day you go there, the light is always different.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and just this idea of like you go in, you don't know what it is, but it might save you, which I think is also a very old, I don't know, very primal desire of humanity. So like,
Exactly. Yeah. I think I find it quite fascinating, maybe just to to go back to this notion of artistic research and what in your case this entails, or what is, what the project is. It seems to me that you are actually in following these leads, or certain narratives that that lead you to certain places, or maybe I guess maybe it's also the places that lead you to the narratives. I think it works both ways. It seems almost to be kind of like an alchemical process where you're processing the information, the associations, and turning these into something else, into their own kind of narrative or shape. So your research is actually also a kind of storytelling, as far as I can surmise. Is this the case? Would you consider yourself also kind of a storyteller, or a reteller, or retailer of stories?
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I love narrative. I'm very interested in storytelling. In my images, I feel like I'm like a story starter. Like obviously they don't depict stories from start to end, but they have a narration of themselves. And the way I like to install them, like especially for this piece, I see it as like an associative narration.
Mm-hmm.
So I visualize the viewer going like from one piece to the other, and of course you can see them all singular for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
but you can also like go from one piece to another, and then that might bring up stuff for you, which then is another story.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and becomes kind of like a prismatic way of seeing, sort of, because you're seeing it kind of like not kaleidoscopic but more prismatic, I think, or like pieces of a puzzle that you can kind of reconstruct or deconstruct according to what you yourself bring into the stories, on your own as a viewer. Perhaps to come to a close. I thought what you said and some text that made a lot of sense to me, that you said stories and legends actually change our perception of a place, and I think that's very true on the one hand, but of course when you then take these stories and the place and turn these into images, that again also does something with our perception of maybe not only that place, but also more in an abstract way of how we, observe or look at our surroundings, environment, because then maybe we start looking at it in a more magical, light, possibly.
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting approach to uncover the hidden magic of places and atmospheres. And I'm sure, you might even find them here in Hamburg. So, maybe not the center of the universe, but maybe something, that might make Hamburg look totally, in a totally different light, so to speak.
Thank you to our two speakers. That was really a good talk, and to get more deep into the work by Sylvie Ringer. So I learned a lot and got new insights. I hope also the audience.